The temperature had fallen to 22 degrees below zero and was still dropping. Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. A train groaned to a halt on the frozen tracks, steam hissing into air so cold it crystallized on contact. The doors slid open. They wore summer uniforms, thin cotton meant for French autumn. No gloves, no scarves, boots already splitting at the seams. Their breath turned to ice the moment it left their lips. One woman took 3 steps onto the platform and collapsed. An American soldier rushed over. He didn't yell. The woman watching this had been told Americans were savages. She had believed it. She didn't know what to believe anymore. To understand how 200 German women ended up on a frozen Wisconsin train platform, you have to understand what the war had made of Europe by late 1944. The Allied invasion of France in June had torn apart the German military apparatus in the West. By autumn, entire Wehrmacht support units had been overrun, captured, or destroyed. Among the prisoners flowing eastward toward American soil were not just soldiers but the women who had kept the German war machine running from behind the lines. Nurses, radio operators, signals auxiliaries, office administrators, women who had served the Wehrmacht in every capacity short of combat. Most had been captured in France. Others were swept up when field hospitals in Belgium were overrun during the brutal fighting that followed the Normandy breakout. They were processed, documented, and shipped across the Atlantic in overcrowded transports, then loaded onto trains heading deep into the American interior. Camp McCoy sat in Monroe County, Wisconsin. It held over 4,000 prisoners in total, the vast majority of them men. The women's section was smaller and separate. 200 prisoners in 4 barracks, 50 per building. The camp had been designed for German and Italian male POWs, and the infrastructure showed it. Small iron stoves, thin walls, military-issue wool blankets that were adequate for a Tennessee autumn, but not for a Wisconsin January that hadn't read the manual. Before we go further into this forgotten story, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss these incredible, true stories from World War II. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The women arriving that day had expected cruelty. Nazi radio had painted American captivity in vivid, terrifying colors. Berlin broadcast described American soldiers as barbarians. The propaganda was specific, detailed, relentless. It had been designed not just to boost German morale, but to ensure that captured soldiers would resist repatriation at any cost. So when the processing took 2 hours and 18 below cold, and 11 women reported frostbite afterward, the surviving propaganda made a kind of terrible sense. This is how they kill us, one thought, slowly, without leaving marks. But then came morning and breakfast, long tables in the mess hall, metal trays, scrambled eggs, bacon, fresh bread with butter, hot coffee. The women stood in the doorway and didn't move. They had come from a Germany where the average civilian caloric intake had dropped below 1,500 calories a day, where turnip soup passed for dinner, where butter was a memory from before the war. Some women wept as they ate, not from sadness, from the overwhelming shock of food they had forgotten existed. The work assignments came after breakfast: laundry, kitchen, uniform repair. Those with medical training were sent to the camp infirmary. Lunch arrived each day with real vegetables, sometimes cheese. The rules were clear and consistently applied. It was not paradise. The barracks were still cold. The stoves fought a losing battle against Wisconsin winter. By the end of the first week, 23 women had reported to the infirmary with frostbite symptoms. 4 cases were severe. One woman who had collapsed on arrival lost 2 toes. At night, the women pushed their cots together and slept in clusters, sharing blankets, sleeping in shifts to keep the stoves fed. They had survived the war. They had survived capture. Now they were fighting the cold itself, and the cold was indifferent to which side anyone had fought on. Then came the bureaucratic confession. An American sergeant gathered them one morning, visibly uncomfortable. The winter supply shipment, he explained through a translator, had been sent to the wrong camp. Replacements were coming. Not yet. That afternoon, a rusted blue pickup truck rolled up to the women's barracks. Not military, civilian. Behind the wheel sat a farmer's wife in her 50s named Ruth Henderson from the nearby town of Sparta. In the truck bed were 200 hand-knitted wool scarves, every color imaginable, each one made by a different woman from the Sparta Methodist Church. The camp commandant came out to see what was happening. Ruth Henderson looked at him over her glasses and asked a single question. "Are those women cold?" "Yes," he said. "Then it's allowed." She handed him a bright blue scarf. He stood holding it in the snow, uncertain. Then he smiled and told his men to call the women out. 200 German women stood in formation in the Wisconsin snow, waiting for another inspection, another roll call. What came instead was Ruth Henderson moving down the line, looking each woman in the eyes, placing a hand-knitted scarf around each neck. She spoke no German. She didn't need to. The message was simple. You are cold. Here is warmth. One woman received a green scarf. She wrapped it around her neck and felt real warmth for the first time in weeks. Her eyes filled with tears. She said thank you in German, and Ruth Henderson, who didn't understand the word, understood it completely. Ruth was only the beginning. 2 days later, another truck arrived carrying heavy winter coats, donated by families from 3 different towns: Tama, Sparta, La Crosse. People had cleaned out closets and storage rooms. Some coats were old. Some were nearly new. All of them were warm. The Lutheran Church in Sparta followed with 150 pairs of wool socks. The Catholic Women's Guild brought mittens and gloves. A retired schoolteacher named Margaret Clean arrived in a station wagon loaded with flannel nightgowns, telling the camp doctor that she couldn't stand the idea of women sleeping in thin clothes in this cold. Over the next 3 weeks, 17 separate civilian groups brought supplies to Camp McCoy: food, clothing, blankets. One farmer donated 40 pounds of butter. A Sparta dairy began delivering fresh milk weekly. A bakery owner brought bread still warm from the oven. No general ordered this. No government program funded it. No bureaucrat approved it in triplicate. These were ordinary American people making an extraordinary human choice. In the infirmary, a German nurse worked alongside an American one named Dorothy from a small town in Minnesota. They shared no common language. They communicated through gesture and expression and the universal vocabulary of medicine. One afternoon, Dorothy handed her a cup of hot chocolate. 4 years had passed since the German woman had tasted chocolate. She held the warm cup and felt tears form. Why, she finally asked in careful English, Why help us? We are the enemy. Dorothy thought about it for a moment. Because you're also human. That comes first. The propaganda had no answer for this. Margaret Clean became a regular visitor. She was 67 years old, a widow. Her son had died at Normandy in June 1944, killed by German artillery. She had every imaginable reason to despise these women. Instead, she taught them English phrases, brought books, sat in the barracks on cold evenings, and talked about Wisconsin winters and farming and ordinary life. One night a woman asked her directly, "Your son was killed by Germans. Why are you kind to us?" Margaret was quiet for a long time. The entire barracks waited. "My son died fighting cruelty," she said finally. "If I am cruel to you, what did he die for? I honor him by being better than the thing he fought against." Not a single eye in that barracks stayed dry. By February, the women's frostbite cases had dropped from 23 in the first week to just 3 in the entire month, all minor. No amputations. No permanent damage. Compare this to the broader record. Camp Concordia in Kansas reported 6 prisoner deaths from cold exposure that winter. Fort Robinson in Nebraska lost 4. Camp McCoy's male section lost 2. The women's section lost none. The difference wasn't military efficiency. It was a farm wife from Sparta and the people who followed her lead. But Wisconsin winter wasn't finished. He arrived on a Tuesday morning in mid-February. He was 58 years old, Ho-Chunk, his people among the original inhabitants of Wisconsin. His ancestors had lived in this land for more than 12,000 years, through climates that had buried armies. His face was weathered and still. His eyes missed nothing. He came to the camp gate and asked to speak with the commandant. He had heard there were women who didn't understand winter. He could teach them. The commandant asked why he would want to help German prisoners. "Winter doesn't ask what country you're from," he said. The next morning he stood before 200 German women in the snow. Most had never encountered a Native American. Nazi ideology had given them no framework for this moment. But what he offered needed no framework. It was ancient, practical, and urgent. He began with breathing. Cold air breathed through the mouth enters the lungs unwarmed. It burns tissue and exhausts the body. The nose warms air before it reaches the lungs. Such a simple thing, yet none of them had known it. He taught them layers. One thick coat traps less heat than multiple thin ones. Air caught between layers insulates. Wear everything at once. He showed them how to wrap a scarf so it covered mouth and nose, leaving only the eyes exposed, allowing breath to escape without soaking the wool. He demonstrated the proper way to build a fire, not large and spreading, but small and concentrated, with the reflector positioned to double the forward heat from the same amount of wood. The camp stoves became twice as effective overnight. He took them into the woods outside the camp, guards following at a distance, and pointed at the trees. Snow accumulates on the windward side. Look at the trees, and you know where the wind comes from. Sleep on the opposite wall. Wind steals heat through wood faster than you realize. That night the women moved their cots to the south wall of the barracks. The change was immediate. He returned 3 times a week for a month. He taught them to recognize hypothermia in each other before it became fatal. The stumbling, the confusion, the paradoxical urge to remove clothing. He taught them that snow is mostly air, and air insulates, and a packed snow wall outside a barracks can mean the difference between endurance and death. He taught them to eat fat and protein for warmth, not just bread. He taught them to keep moving always, to shift weight, to wiggle toes, to never let stillness settle into the body when the cold was hunting. One afternoon she stopped him to ask the same question she had asked the others. Why teach enemies? He looked at the sky for a moment. His people had been enemies of the cavalry once, he said quietly. Some soldiers learned from them. Some died because they wouldn't. Knowledge should not be a weapon. Cold kills everyone the same. He walked away before she could respond. The warning came February 23rd. A storm system moving east from the Dakotas. Weather stations reporting wind speeds over 60 miles per hour. Record low temperatures. Snowfall measured in feet. The worst in 50 years. The commandant gathered everyone, prisoners and staff alike. Nobody goes outside. No work details. No movement. We survive together. The announcement settled over them with the weight of the coming storm and the certainty of shared fate. The women had 3 hours. They acted immediately. Everything learned compressed into focused effort. Cots moved to the south wall. Rags and torn paper sealed window cracks. Clothing sorted for layering. Wood stacked by the stove. Containers filled before pipes froze. Sleep rotations organized. Boots checked, 2 pairs always loose. These were not the frightened, shivering women who had arrived 6 weeks earlier. When the storm hit at 2, the wind screamed. Barracks shook. Snow struck sideways, sharp as sand. Visibility vanished. Temperature fell to 28 below zero. Wind chill nearer 50. The world outside disappeared completely. Inside they rotated every 20 minutes, edges to center, center to stove. They wore everything. Donated coats, Lutheran socks, Catholic mittens, hand-knitted scarves from Ruth Henderson's church. Layered exactly as taught. They breathed through noses, kept moving, guarded circulation, watched one another for frostbite or fear. On the second night the stovepipe cracked and smoke filled the room. Panic would have killed them. Instead they moved. Wet rags packed into the seam. Damper adjusted. A window opened 1 precise inch to vent smoke without surrendering heat. They worked quickly, silently, together. The storm lasted 72 hours. When the wind stopped, silence felt wrong after constant howling. They waited 2 more hours, remembering danger at the end. Snow sealed the door. They tunneled with boards and trays through 12-foot drifts. The camp lay buried. 2 prisoners and 1 guard died. In the women's section, 0 deaths. Then they heard an engine. An old blue pickup pushed through the drifts. Ruth Henderson had come with hot soup, fresh bread, blankets. Margaret Clean followed, then 3 Ho-Chump men with firewood and venison, and the Lutheran church group carrying medical supplies. The commandant stood in the snow watching it all, shaking his head. He said they were absolutely crazy. Ruth Henderson only smiled. Maybe, but those girls needed soup. That was reason enough to drive through drifts and risk the roads in the aftermath of the worst storm in 50 years. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. The news reached Camp McCoy on a Tuesday morning. The war in Europe was over. In the women's barracks, relief tangled with dread. For 37 women, word followed quickly and brutally. Nothing remained. Families gone, homes bombed. One learned her entire street in Hamburg had vanished. Repatriation began in July. The women were processed for transport east to the coast, then by ship to a Germany unrecognizable. The night before the first departure, Ruth Henderson organized a farewell dinner at her farm. 20 at a time sat at a real table and ate pot roast, potatoes, apple pie with cream. Ruth spoke through a translator before they left. "What happened here between us was real," she said. "The war was the lie. This was the truth." He who had taught them winter came the day before the final group departed, shaking each hand and offering a final lesson about survival and responsibility. Cold teaches you that survival requires helping each other. Remember that when you go home, your country forgot it. Don't you forget it. Between July and September 1945, all 200 women left Camp McCoy and crossed an ocean back to a defeated, broken nation. Some came back. 17 returned to Wisconsin over decades, bringing children and grandchildren. One saved for 2 years to afford the trip and sat again at Ruth Henderson's kitchen table. The winter could have killed them, she said. What saved them was being shown they still mattered. Ruth Henderson died in 1983 at 95. Her family received 31 letters from Germany. Margaret Kleen died in 1987. 14 former prisoners attended her funeral. He who had taught them winter died in 1979. A wreath arrived from Germany. In 2003, a small plaque was placed in Sparta, Wisconsin. No monument marks the barracks. The land returned to forest and field. The story survived in letters and memory. The war had 1,000 weapons. The cold was one. But kindness, it turned out, was stronger than both.